What's good, Majestic ones? This is a pretty exciting day for me. This is the first one of this type of video that we're doing. So, as most of our readers and supporters of Majestic Comics knows, there's Extropy and Entropy, and I think we're on our issue 02 that's about to come up soon. But that's not the only IP that is coming from off of Majestic Comics. We have other IPs, and in particular, this one, I am like super excited about this particular one, created wholly and totally by my man Christopher Colburn, and he's bringing his IP to Majestic Comics. I have looked over a lot of the character stuff and the world building, and I think it's amazing, and I can't wait to see what comes from it. But before we dive into that, let me do a little bit of paying bills. For everybody who doesn't know, ReaperLegion.com is now available. It's open. Just go on there. We have all kinds of t-shirt designs, hats, you name it. We have it on there, and more products are coming. Also, those of you that have not yet, consider joining the Majestic Comics Patreon so you can get access to content like this early, right? Because this will eventually go on our YouTube channel, but those who have Patreon, that are Patreon members, they get access to this first. They get to see it first, and then they get exclusive stuff. So that's always important too. And also, if you haven't yet, go check out our majesticcomics.shop online store to get digital versions of the comic books. We're going to be restocking with the physical versions at the end of February, but you still can get the digital version of both comics that are out right now, right there on that shop. So definitely consider supporting your local comic book company. So, Introduce yourself a little bit. Just a little bit.
My name is Chris Colburn. Appreciate you having me on. You know, I'm just as excited to kind of give everybody an idea of what I've been working on.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm the creator and writer of Singularity. Have been a lifetime, reader and lover of comic books, and it's kind of been like, an ongoing goal of mine to kind of add my voice to that. So, Singularity is my foray into that, and I'm pretty excited to get to do it with you guys and rock it with Majestic.
Awesome, man. So first, before we kind of dive into parts of the story and the characters and stuff, what inspired you to start writing? Was it just the fact that you were a comic book fan like me that kind of inspired me to want to write comics after reading comics for all those years, or was it something else?
Well, it wasn't just comics. My mom is a teacher, and so it was kind of pounded into me very early about, the importance of being well read. And so, even when it wasn't comics, it was like, books of all kinds across many different genres, and just in experiencing all these different worlds from all these different people, meeting all these different characters. And it's like, some of these characters, you meet them and it's like, you know them and you've had like a lifetime of experiences with them, and you get to the last word of the last page and you're like saying goodbye to a friend. And so it's like, I've always kind of thought of it from, a storytelling standpoint, and how it's like, it's been something that's kind of been a recurring part of my life, not even just with movies or books or comic books, but, think about how we experience like our families and stuff like that. It's like stories getting shared, carried on.
It reminds me of something that Loki said in an issue of Thor. Basically, he was explaining the nature of reality, and he said that the universe is not just made up of atoms; it's made up of stories. Right? I always thought that was very poignant, right? Because if you think about it, the stories that we're told, if they're told in a provocative way, do have an influence on how we see the world, how we behave, how we interact and engage with one another. Those things are super important. So tell me something about your story. Give us a kind of a background of your story.
Well, the takeaway of it is kind of a slice of life coming of age story that is set in a world not too dissimilar from ours, that just so happens to have a backdrop of the superhero genre.
Right.
That's kind of how I wanted to navigate the story and use like the superhero mythos to kind of tell the story of these people and who they are and where they're going.
And how many major characters, like for right now, the main characters right now, give us the breakdown on those characters.
Yeah. So the big three, as I like to call them, it's Levi Strode, Red Star. There's Gabriel Caballero, who becomes Deacon, and then there's Dana Wu, who is Nue. These are, our three linchpins into the story, into the world, and that's who the readers are going to get to meet first, and it's going to be through their viewpoint that they learn about the greater world of Singularity. There are other characters that are specific to each of them. I mean, Levi has his parents, Gabriel and Dana have their family, as well as their own friends and situations that are going on before the inciting incident that kicks off Singularity.
So give us a short synopsis of the story without giving us too many spoilers. Just a short synopsis.
It's a story of three high schoolers who are thrust into a cosmic struggle that forces them to reckon with their own humanity and, face the question of what it means to be a hero.
Wow. So because it has the background setting of the superhero genre, I suppose that means that each one of these characters will at some point either attain powers themselves, or maybe one or two of them get powers and the other doesn't. How's that going to work out?
Well, the approach of it that I see is that, when we get to know Levi and Gabriel in issue 1, we're meeting them at a different point in their lives that Dana is when we meet her in the next issue. And so, as far as the three of them goes, she's the one who's kind of starting a leg ahead, and we learn that she's been at this for a while. And while Levi and Gabriel come into their abilities, the whole superpowered game isn't new to Dana. And that's kind of going to be an interesting dynamic to explore.
Yeah,
as they
the newbies. She has to school the newbies.
Yeah,
that's pretty dope.
For sure.
So let me ask you this: what inspired the creation of the Singularity universe, and how did you develop, the sci-fi and superhero elements? How did you decide what would weigh more, superhero, sci-fi?
Singularity really began with my love for creating characters, to go back to that, what we were talking about. And, growing up reading comics, I always imagined myself like being a part of those pantheons, like what would my origin story be, my secret identity, my powers and abilities. And, it wasn't long I had like this entire catalog of characters, and I started thinking of them outside of the context of, of the existing comics. And I began to imagine what it would be like if they had their own world. With its own lore and its own history, and in developing that, and the universe, the greater universe of Singularity, I wanted the superhero elements to be more of a backdrop to the greater picture, with them feeling like an intruding force, on our principal characters as well as the world itself. And as far as the direction of the sci-fi and superhero elements, it's the question of what it means to be human. And what's the worth of our ingenuity and technological advancements in the face of cosmic forces? And, beyond that, I really see the superhero genre as an umbrella. And when you're exploring in the superhero space, you can kind of dabble in all the different genres.
Do anything.
Right. As Singularity does go on, it'll touch on horror, drama, noir, as much as it does sci-fi and more traditional superhero themes. I think sci-fi is definitely like the most accessible jumping off. Like people can see it and usually draw a relation to the real world, but that's just the hook that draws you in, and you start to realize that there's layers to the world, layers to the story, and layers to the conflict as a whole.
Interesting. So how did you approach the process of the character development, like to make sure that like each one of them had a distinct voice and background? Because one of the complaints I've heard when people talk about indie comics, a lot of, especially the new ones that are coming up, the less popular ones, is that when they read the dialogue, the characters really all have the same voice. They don't have anything distinctive between them.
Yeah. That's been something whenever I was younger, I struggled with, and you start to realize that, you can't be talking through all your different characters. And
Right,
so like
right,
when it comes
right,
to me developing characters, I usually start with like their background because, you to know who a character is, you have to know where they come from and how they see the world and themselves. And
right,
that outlook is shaped by the experiences they go through. And, like each of us have our own experiences that shapes who we are, how we see the world, and that way the character views themselves and the world shapes how they interact with the other characters in the greater world itself. So I aim to just kind of keep a character true to that voice, and when they're experiencing interactions with other characters, it's when they're true to that sense of their view of the world that you feel like, okay, this is a character who's speaking from what they've experienced, and it
right,
runs counter to another character. And it's like, for me, my goal is to always, when I'm developing scenes, I know I've done the right amount of development when I can just like put characters in a scene and have it unfold based on the dynamics of how these characters view themselves, each other, and the situation they're in. And you do really get to a point when you know these characters inside and out, where they're choosing their own dialogue, really. And a conversation can go in a way that you didn't intend it, because it's like, well, wait, this is how I want the scene to go, but if so and so is gonna live up to who they are, this is
right,
how they would behave. And
right.
the characters drive the story, and the characters serve the story, as far as I'm concerned.
I like that. A lot of the times, uh, when you do flesh out the background of the character, it actually helps you with the dialogue. Because the situations that you put them in because of the flow of the story, you're still going to have to figure out how these individual personalities are
Right.
going to react and behave in these situations. So I've always
Right.
found it to be a lot easier. And I think that's the reason why I write so much background lore, stuff that
Yeah.
probably won't
Yeah.
even be revealed in the main part of the story, but it helps
Exactly.
me, so it
It's
makes
that
sense.
secret sauce,
It's the
because
secret
you're
sauce.
writing
That's it.
you're writing from a position of like, this character stands in one position, the other one stands in another, and they equally have to believe themselves. And it's like,
Right.
they have to have the same amount of conviction in what they believe. Otherwise, a conflict or a conversation or a struggle doesn't really like land.
Yeah.
And
Sounds hollow.
readers can tell when yeah, exactly. Readers can
Oh yeah.
tell when the characters themselves don't even believe what they're saying or how they're behaving.
Right. Right. It just lacks conviction.
Hmm.
Um, So, what it sounds like to me is that in this particular story, you have a lot of complex themes, like existentialism, morality, cosmic destiny, and all of that stuff. Like, how challenging is it to have to write that? Because so I found for myself there are times where I may get lost and have to reorient myself because
Yeah.
there are themes that I do want to touch, but I don't want to touch them in a ham-handed way so that it's so obvious that this is what
Right.
we're trying to
Right.
do. How do you handle that?
Uh, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly, and I've found myself even where it's like, you're getting caught in the philosophy of it, or you're not even really
Right.
thinking about it how it relates to the story. You're just kind of like thinking in circles. And so I think whenever you're working with concepts like that, there is a fine line between being universally relatable, or like you
Mhm.
said, heavy-handed and preachy. And
Yeah, preach it. That's the
chances are
word.
most people have had moments in their life where they've faced a crisis of morality or struggled with thoughts of their place in the world or what the meaning of it all is. So my approach
Right.
personally is to just offer a perspective to those ideas and concepts rather than definitive conclusions.
Yeah.
Because none of us have the answers, and even in a
True.
world of your own creation, I think it's important to leave room for interpretation and even a sense of wonder and uncertainty. You could be the type of creator that has an answer for everything in your world, but it's like there has to be the gray area, just like there
Yeah.
is in our
Yeah.
reality. Like we have
Yeah.
a ton of stuff written down, but it's like, what definitive answers do we have?
Yeah, it's very true. It's funny that you say that too, because just from a character standpoint, when we think about like real people, I was
Mm,
last week. I went on a binge listening to these debates between neuroscientists about free will, and one of the scientists that does not believe in any form of free will, based on the data and the
mm,
studies, was basically saying that we are a product of our environment, how we was raised, the type of education we have, and we can show where those things does affect the way our brain develops. He mentioned an example of people who grow up in these impoverished areas that are kind of dangerous, and people are struggling over resources. The frontal lobe of their brain tends to develop different when it deals with decision making, right? So where some people might, who didn't come from scarcity, they can hold off on purchasing and save money, and also because they recognize that there's a greater goal at the end. But a lot of people that haven't, their brain did not develop that way, so a lot of times they don't make those decisions.
Survival mode, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they're in survival mode. So he also said these things can change depending on the type of experiences, because your brain develops new neural pathways and stuff depending on the experiences outside stimulus, right? So it's kind of like the way it is with these, how you want to write these characters. Like, the character has to be true to that personality, right? If you've already developed a certain personality about this character, at the very least, when you introduce them to the readers, they should kind of fit that mold. Cyclops is probably one of the more has experienced more character development and growth than a lot of the other X-Men, because he started out as a Boy Scout, and then you know, as time went on, he was a terrorist, basically, right? They considered him a terrorist. And he no longer just believed in the fact that, we have to all unify.
Cyclops
like, nope,
did nothing wrong.
Cyclops did nothing wrong. Exactly. So let me ask you this: how do you balance the need for like action-packed sequences with deeper character and story development? Because readers do want to be excited. One of the critiques, and sometimes it's up to interpretation, but one of the critiques we had for our first issue from someone was that I really would have liked it if more of the action had been front loaded. But then we've heard from other people to say it seems like I'm thrown into it to something that's already going on. So how do you balance that?
I think the key is really just not to view them as mutually exclusive. Conflict is always a catalyst for change in individuals and the worlds they inhabit. So when violence or action happens in Singularity, it's happening as a product of choices or consequences or fall in the characters. And if your audience is truly invested in the characters you've given them, then any situation they face with true stakes, be it combat or conversation, it's going to carry the same weight. And I think it's the moments between the fights that make the fights more intense, because you should have the same level of making your readers bond with your characters in those slow moments as well as in the fast-paced moments. Because if you don't care about your characters, then what is really the stakes that they face when they're thrown into a dangerous situation or face uncertainty? And it's like, I think there's many different ways to explore action and things like that. And I think readers do appreciate character-driven things, even if it's not like a slugfest. It could be a conflict of character, where it's like, for instance, Man of Steel. One of my favorite scenes was when Zod and Jor-El talk to each other, both on Krypton. And in the end, and it's like, what makes their conflict, their conversation, not that just the fight where Jor-El kicked his ass, but the whole dynamic of these were friends, these are brothers. They had a common goal, and now they are standing on two sides of a chasm that can never be brought back. And so it's like, there's a sadness and intensity there of seeing that, and it's like, I don't know. There's many moments I've had in comic books where the weight that happens in those quieter moments, to me, it makes me think of them as not different tools. They're all like,
it's all the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And they feed into the same story that you're trying to tell. You can't really do one without the other. You would literally just have a book of people hitting each other, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, the context matters. The context,
it's connective tissue,
Yeah. You can't. It doesn't make sense in any way. And then also, you want people to be invested in the outcome, right? So the person can't really be that invested in the outcome of a physical altercation if they haven't picked sides, if they don't understand the personalities of these two, if they haven't been invested in the relationship between the two people. It's like if you just had Superman
Mm-hmm.
fighting, I don't know, Darkseid, without the context of who Superman is, without the context of what Darkseid is. Basically, what you have
Yep.
here is a guy in a red and blue suit and this other big rocky face dude just hitting each other.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and it might make some awesome scenes, but you don't really care who wins because you
Right.
don't know the
Right.
motivation between it. It does matter, and the history
Yeah.
between the characters matters. So no, I 100%
Absolutely. Yeah. The
agree.
relationships. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
They're part of that.
matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Okay. How do you envision the evolution of the Singularity series, both in terms of story and character arcs?
Ultimately, the initial 10 issues are, in
Mhm.
my mind, a long form origin story for our main three heroes and the greater world itself. The character stories extend far beyond that point, and there will be journeys our big three go on, both as a team and as individuals. And, there's also potential for new characters and perspectives into the world of Singularity in the form of spin offs or one shots.
I
We've
love
discussed a
spin-offs.
few other ideas that I've had
Right.
that are,
Right.
contingent on the Singularity world. So there's a lot of exciting different avenues, and I'm excited to start dropping breadcrumbs for readers to pick up on.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
it's
kind of
exciting.
what this is now. This is kind of breadcrumbs
Yeah,
too. I thought it would be. It's a real important for the readers, especially the early on in the lifetime of Majestic Comics,
right.
to kind of get a peek into the writers before they read the story, to get their take on how to structure a story and what they want to accomplish with the story, what meaning, if any, they have with the story, because I think that's important. This past 2 weeks, I have been deep diving into Tolkien, um, just all kinds of analysis about his world building
Yeah,
and
master
how
at
it
it.
feels alive. Like even to
Yeah,
this day, it feels like there is so much more story to tell that even though he wrote so much, it seems like it's still wide open
yeah,
for other stories to be told about. And I think that is the key to actually being successful with building a world that feels lived in. It feels like it
absolutely.
has the weight of history, that the characters, the things they do have affected that world, and you
Right.
see the results of it. It doesn't just go on like it's always been, even after this major thing took place, and then everything is
Cataclysm.
back to,
Cataclysm.
yeah, right. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think he, more than a lot of other people, understood those things, like the intertwining of different pathways of everybody's story,
Right.
somehow linking up with the other character's story. Way over here, they may not even met
Yep.
each other yet, but their story intertwines. It's amazing, and he borrowed a lot from, of course, like a lot of us writers do, from examples we saw in the world. You know what I
Right.
mean? So in that vein, like, in what ways do you draw from your personal experiences or real world issues to enrich the storytelling and Singularity?
That's a great question. I think I tend to inject a bit of myself into every character I make, kind of
Same.
a way to explore aspects of my personality outside of my own
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, I've been fortunate to meet a lot of different people from a lot of different walks of life, and that's influenced my character development heavily. And it always makes me, in the sense that it makes me conscious of thinking outside of my own experience in my writing. Like when I'm creating characters, I don't want them to all be from the same place. So, I definitely think about the
Right.
people I've met and, the experiences I've shared with them. And, um, as for real world issues, they always shape our art, whether we know it or not.
Yeah.
And Singularity is a world that's not too far removed from our own. Because
Right.
I think it's important for an artist to reflect the times they're in. So, there would definitely be connections that people draw to the real world. Some may be intended and some may be just like kind of circumstantial, but it's all like part of that toolbox whenever I'm building the world of Singularity.
That's awesome, man. I like when you said that it will affect your writing whether you intended to or not.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Too many times, especially currently, it seems to be a misunderstanding about the type of things that go in the comic books. You hear
Right.
the complaints about, oh, it's getting too political. comic books have almost always been political.
They weren't paying
And,
attention,
and we're just paying more attention to it now. But it's kind of always been that way. And really, writing fiction in general has always been influenced by the world events. If you look at C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that whole series, he used elements from the World War, religious elements from his lived experience and stuff. It's like, I don't know how you create a world without having those things in it. And if you could, it wouldn't feel like this world.
Right.
It would feel, I think, kind of sanitized, right? And
yeah,
a bit
absolutely.
shallow, right?
Yeah.
You know, the kind of shallow, because these characters are operating within a certain structure and paradigm, right? And if you want the world to feel real, if you're in the city, there should probably be a mayor, right? You know what I mean? There should probably be police officers. There should probably be other citizens going back and forth.
And what's the dynamic between those? You know, like what's the power structure like? You know,
what's
it's
the
like
power structure.
And it's I agree. It's like, you know, the people who are trying to cop out that it's like, oh, now we're wading into political waters. It's like, you know, maybe the narratives have just shifted past like what you agree with, or, you know, what you're comfortable with being addressed. And it's like, you know, I think what's important to tell too is like, you know, comic books are a form of storytelling, and storytelling is how we convey things to each other as a species. It goes beyond like movies or books or whatever. Like, goes back to like cave paintings and like lithographs and things like that. So it's like, you know, and if politics is just the way that we experience each other on a world scale, then, you know, politics being in storytelling shouldn't be this like this thing that's frowned upon. It's like, it's a natural product of us sharing our experiences with each other. And if you're honest with someone's experiences, then, you know, you're going to touch on political things when you talk about oppression and, you know, systemic racism and, you know, institutionalized warfare. Like, these are all things that have like real world impacts on people. So, you know, it's funny. It's like some of the best stories in my experiences have been, you know, really steeped in the real world. Like, you talk about Tolkien, you talk about C.S. Lewis, like Tolkien shaped Lord of the Rings off of his experiences with World War I.
Absolutely.
And, you know, Frank Herbert and Dune, like Dune has become more relevant now than it was when he wrote it. And it's like, it's not because people are becoming more political. It's because the situations that these people talk about and the material realities that they are addressing are being perpetuated. And it's like, you know, people are going to comment on what they experience in their life.
Exactly.
And if you're an artist and your way of commenting on the world is through your art, then, you know, if you are, you know, someone who cares about reflecting the world and times and the people that are around you, you will inject the real world into your art. Like you said, it seems it's sanitized. It's clinical. You don't really have that sense of like investment, you know, and it's, I think what's important, even the most fantastical story on like the far set planet, like from Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Dune, they're human stories, you know, there's nothing that's happened in those stories that you couldn't say, you know, conceptually have happened in the real world. So,
and it makes sense too, because it's something that me and Graydon had talked about before. You're writing stories for people. You're not writing stories for aliens. You're not writing stories for dogs. You're writing these stories for people. So there has to be, even when you go to create some alien world, some alien situations or whatever, it all comes down to humanity's mirror on itself. That's what it is.
Connective tissue. Yeah.
That connective tissue. So they can look weird, all of that stuff. But if there's nothing there that connects the person to some lived experience that they've either seen themselves or heard from other people, you're going to have a hard time at getting them to feel attached to that story. You know? So one other thing too, how do you see the relationship between technology and humanity explored in your series? Because there is tech, there's tech in your story, advanced tech in your story, and what message do you intend to convey through it?
I gotta be honest, this was probably my favorite question that you threw at me. You know, and I think a lot of people see technology as a product of innovation, instead of innovation being a product of technology. In history, technology has often predated the relevant scientific concepts. You know, for instance, the steam engine it was first created well over a century before we had any kind of understanding of like thermodynamics. And the same can be said with the bow and arrow before we had, you know, any kind of concept of physics. So in a way,
aerodynamics.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And in a way, you know, Singularity explores how technology it can be an extension of humanity's attempts to understand and interact with the world around it, and how that understanding might be forever shifted if we were faced with a technology beyond our understanding and not of our design. And it's extremely relevant to one of our main heroes as well as the chief antagonist, as it's their interaction with such a technology that sets them on their individual paths. So it's, you know, it's my favorite aspect of exploring it, because it's kind of like, you know, the MCU touched on it with Thor about, you know, the technology that we don't understand perceived as magic. And it's like, you know, maybe there really isn't a difference between the two, you know. And it's like you think about how like we think about the way things work on planet Earth might not work somewhere else. So it's like our entire understanding of our surroundings is based on like Euclidean geometry and like Newtonian physics. So if you ever met something that didn't operate by any of those standards, and, you know, didn't have any kind of like conceptual relation to anything you ever understood, like what would you think? You know, yeah, exactly. Or, and if it was taken to the worst degree and it was like subverting human supremacy, then it's like, well, what does anything matter in comparison to that, you know? So it's like, you know, but at the same time, it's like there's that poem Ozymandias, you know, look on my work, see mighty and despair, and how even like the greatest creation is not permanent, you know. So I think that's kind of like, you know, where I'm going with it.
I like that even the greatest works are not permanent. It reminds me of a line I said in the song where I said the only thing that's permanent is the state of impermanence. Right, that's it.
Bars.
Yeah, of course. And the other thing too, like I do like the idea that you're going to explore how people, like, they get introduced to this tech that is now affecting their lives. They're not going to come out on the other side of it the same. And I'm not even just talking about the usage of abilities. I'm talking about just their psychology. Like, they're not going to be the same after experiencing, especially having to figure it out. A lot of the times mean having to put yourself in the head of somebody else. But the problem with that is this somebody else doesn't have the same biochemistry as you, doesn't have the same experience or anything. So they
don't even see the same spectrum of light.
They don't even, exactly. And the thing that bothered me about if you remember the first Independence Day movie, the thing that bothered me about it, because I enjoyed it, I thought it was a fun ride.
Classic. Yeah.
But the part that bothered me was them hacking and putting a virus into this alien computer, and I was like,
with a floppy disk, right?
And it's like, bruh, that kind of broke the immersion for me a bit. I was like, Cap?
It's like if we could have stopped them from blowing up the White House if we had done that.
Exactly. Like, that's it. So
awkward.
Floppy in there, and
right. Well, that's another thing too. It's like, you know, I mean, not to bash Independence Day at all, but it's like, you know, you have to play by your own rules. You know, if you establish a set of rules in your world, it's like, you know, oh, this is an advanced alien technology far beyond our understanding, and even though we've been studying it, we have no idea how it works. Oh, but we can hack into it. I've got a spare floppy in the back. It had Oregon Trail on it, but we overwrote it, and now it's got the launch codes for this alien shit. But, you know, 45 megabit floppy disk.
And just when, mind you, this is an advanced civilization that obviously, I would imagine, started their evolutionary development before us. They're probably an older civilization. And imagine that. that our stuff is compatible to even, and they have no virus shields or nothing. It's just
no Norton, no ad blocker.
No Norton,
no firewall. It's like we've conquered all these other planets. I guess they just didn't have a, you know, floppy disks.
I guess.
It. But, you know, I mean, maybe that was the point though, because, like, I mean, that soldier guy, didn't he fly into the mothership with like a old like biplane? Like, it wasn't like a modern jet. So maybe we tapped into something there, you know.
That might, you know what?
Independence Day people.
When you look back and re-examine it, it
Hmm.
kind of makes it a little. All right, I could see them not being
Hey,
prepared for the low tech.
analog over digital.
Right.
It. I mean, there's something to that. They say the
It is.
nuclear launch codes are kept on floppy disks, so
There's
you know.
something to it. Like even in music, I find that I like the sound of things that was recorded with analog equipment better than I like the digital. I think
Oh yeah,
because
absolutely.
and in digital, zero is absolute. If your sound goes above zero, it's gonna clip.
You
But in
know,
analog, you clip and it
man.
might sound good on the
Yeah,
track.
yeah, yeah. Might add some flavor to it. And
Yeah.
it's crazy. It's like I hate to sound like one of those guys, but it's like I have a record player and it's like,
Mhm.
listening to a track on digital and listening to it on the record,
It's
it's
a
like
difference.
the sound is richer, it's nicer, and
Fuller,
it's
more
the
warm.
same can be said not just for the music industry, but for like the film industry. Like
Absolutely.
digital age of cinema, there's a lot of awesome things that it can do. But if
Oh
you
yeah.
if you pick a movie that was shot in like 2023 versus something that was shot on film, even in the same year, they look totally different.
They
It's like
do. They definitely do.
True Detective season 1 versus any of the other seasons. True
Right.
Detective season was shot on film, and it's like
Right.
the rest of them weren't. And it's like if you know what to look for, it is kind of glaring. So
Yeah.
it's kind if you've got a trained ear or a trained eye, it's like there's something to analog being better. I think
Absolutely.
you should never shun technology, and digital has its uses, but there's a reason that analog has stuck around for as long as it has.
And I don't think it's really going to go anywhere. I think
No.
that it'll always be vestiges of it remaining for practical reasons.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of it isn't going to go anywhere. So, can you share some insights into your creative process, particularly how you collaborate with your team and bringing the world of Singularity to life?
Yeah, for the most part, it's been a solitary venture with the development of
Mm-hmm.
Singularity. I've been building up the characters, the world, and the lore for well over a decade now.
Yes.
For me, a lot of those stories start with the characters and understanding who they are, what they
Right.
want, what are their goals, what are their fears. It's really building the cast out before you even know what story you're telling or what world you're telling. And it's like
Right.
once you flesh those characters out, it's easier to start imagining what kind of world they'd be part of.
Absolutely.
The fun and crazy thing about world building, and you touched on this earlier, is that most often in the work it will be unseen by readers and audiences, and even if it's not information that's relevant to the immediate plot, it's information that
Right.
you, as the
I need it.
writer and the arbiter of the world, yeah, you got to know that. The
Yeah.
biggest collaborations though I have encountered with Singularity have been working with the artists over this
Mm-hmm.
to create the
Mm-hmm.
first issue. It's been immensely gratifying to see the world that I've had in my head for so long since I was a kid start to take shape. At the same time, I had to learn a level of acceptance that the artist's interpretation of the scripts I give them might not be a one-to-one of my
It's a
mental
collaborative
image.
work, bro.
Right, it
It's
is
a
a collaborative
collaborative
work because
work.
it's like
You know?
the script is what tells the story, but I found by allowing room for that interpretation and the artistic freedom, the end product is usually something even beyond what I could have imagined. And at the end of the day, like you said, they're comic books, like other artistic ventures, are collaborative. And
Yeah.
I'm very lucky and grateful to have met the incredible artists who've helped bring the world of Singularity to life. And I'm really looking forward to showing everybody what they've been working on
I'm
and
looking
helping
forward to
get their names
everybody
out
seeing
there.
it too.
They're incredible.
Absolutely. So I want to kind of focus on the individual characters for a second. So
Okay.
Levi Strode, am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, Levi
Strode,
Strode.
Red Star. What is the
Mhm.
inspiration behind Levi's character and his transformation into Red Star? Like, how do you
Yeah.
envision his journey of grappling his powers?
Yeah. I wanted to develop a character who was the product of privilege and access, but wasn't comfortable with either of those things.
Mm,
Kind of like a nature versus nurture, as
right,
the privileged upbringing he experienced afforded by his mother, it was tempered by his father's worldview and the powerful sense of morality that he instilled into him. Um,
right.
you know, Levi's mother is the chief financial officer for Gold Industries, and his father is a decorated firefighter, a renowned kind of like a hero of the city, but also
Hmm.
century high royalty, because he was like, captain of the football team, all that stuff. So
Right,
in a lot of
right,
ways, Levi is like a quintessential character in some aspects, where if you look at him, he might look like a stereotype. He's a person who has to live by narratives that have been kind of put on him,
right,
by his mother's reputation with Gold Industries, be it better or worse, and the legacy of his dad that he's trying to live up to. And he's really kind of like the moral center for the readers to look at, but not in like a he knows what he's like talking about, but
right,
it's like it's the comparison between what's going on and how he feels about it, and how that
right.
might relate to a lot of the way other readers look at it. Because in a world of various shades of gray, Levi is trying to be that moral center, and that's really going to be his struggle. It's going to become more difficult as
Of
he's
course.
faced with difficult choices with Red Star, and the dividing line between morality starts to become more ambiguous, because there's and it goes back to as far as like Uncle Ben, with great power comes great
Great
responsibility. It's like once
responsibility.
you have once you have an ability to do something, and you have like an innate call to do something about it, then you are obligated. But that doesn't mean that what you want to do is always right.
Necessarily
And
what you should be doing. Right,
right.
right.
And there's a sense of like naivety when it comes to Levi. He tries to see the world in black and white, and it just
Hmm.
isn't like that.
Yeah,
And it definitely doesn't get easier when you are thrust into situations where your actions may very well lead to people's death or
yeah,
rescue. you
yeah,
know
yeah. I think there's something to be said about uh kind of leaning into the presuppositions about certain character types. It makes it
Right.
easier for readers to latch on. And then as they begin to learn more about the character, they realize, well, no, this character, I thought he was going to be like this. He's not
Right.
really like that. But I think that is a
Right.
great jump on point for readers
Yeah.
who kind of invest some emotional currency into the character
Right.
itself. I think that's really a great idea to do that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Dana Wu. Can you discuss how you created her? What is her role? Her
Yeah.
background in science, all of that.
So she is the most experienced of the big three, having already come into her powers by the time the story of Singularity has begun.
Right,
She serves as somewhat of a mentor for Gabriel, while also being a contrast to Levi's approach to being a hero. Um, Dana's had individual experiences leading up to when we meet her that have
right,
left her feeling kind of jaded and isolated and alone in her mission. Um, Dana tends to view the world through an analytical lens, and that's definitely a product of her at times cold and clinical upbringing. Um,
hmm,
Both of her parents are scientists for Gold Industries. Her mother no longer works for the company by the time the story begins, but there is kind of like this innate rift in the family of unspoken things that have happened, and Dana's trying to navigate that while also trying to navigate her own internal struggles, as she is trying to find really the answers of her abilities and where they come from. And
right,
there's a level of distrust that she might have towards her parents as her journey towards those answers point towards Gold Industries, and kind of like raises the question of her parents' culpability, like how much of their involvement is there. So I
that's
think
great.
her
That's a great
story.
conflict too.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
great conflict in the characters.
Right. So it's Dana's understanding of some of the forces that the big three find themselves facing establishes her as the leader among these
Right,
burgeoning heroes, and someone
right,
who's going to be willing to take the tough decisions in the face of danger. Because, like I said, when we meet her, she's been on a vendetta. Like, she's not trying to really so much discover what she can do, but she's
hmm,
trying to discover why she can do it and how it's
mm.
come to be. Where Levi and Gabriel are trying to get their sea legs, so to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah, yeah. That makes sense. And speaking of Gabriel, am I pronouncing his last name right?
Yeah. Yep.
Caballero. Is that how you
Yep.
pronounce
Gabriel
that?
Caballero.
Yeah, Deacon. So what inspired his creation and his empathic abilities as Deacon?
Uh, the themes of legacy and generational trauma are reflected through many of the characters throughout Singularity, and most notably through Gabriel. And I was really inspired by my attempts to reconcile some of my own experiences with loss and grief. As a soulbound, those are emotions that are central to Gabriel's abilities. And,
Right.
you know, I wanted a character whose abilities were strengthened by their capacity to embrace those feelings rather than to suppress them. You know, it's of the big three that it's Gabriel who faces the most personal stakes in regarding his powers.
Mhm.
And he will have to uncover truths about his own family to understand what it means to be soulbound. And, you know, being of two worlds, both the seen and the unseen, Gabriel's perspectives will always be altered by things that may not be seen or even believed by others. And so, you know,
Mhm.
Gabriel is the kind of the character in which we tap into the possibility of there being more than the material world, or like what can be proven through science, and, you know,
Right.
exploring more of the mystical elements of the world. And, you know,
I was
like,
going to ask you about that too. I was
yeah,
so his powers are more linked to what they would consider the supernatural,
yes,
the
absolutely.
mystical, esoteric stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I I'm tempted to break down the Soulbound, but I want readers to
Yeah,
discover
you
it.
want them to. Yeah, I know.
Uh,
You
yeah, but
feel that.
it's definitely like the answer of, like, you know, the magic, the science, and then if those are the three pillars of Singularity, you have the cosmos, you have
Mhm.
the sciences, and the path of enlightenment, and then you have, you know,
That's nice.
the
That's
supernatural.
dope.
So
That's dope. That's dope. As a matter of fact, we're
yeah.
gonna market that. We're gonna market that. We're gonna that's dope. And finally, I kind of what I wanted to do was to give the readers a introduction
Okay.
to the IP, also to get to know you a bit, your process, how you think about the characters and stuff. We're definitely going to do more.
Right.
We can do a few more of these. So I would love for the people on Patreon as well as the people that see this on YouTube to just stay, in tune. So make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already, so you can get notified about any of these other videos, because this is not going to stop with this series here. We have another writer, two other writers that are bringing their IP to Majestic Comics, and I plan on really interviewing all of them. Um, is there anything? Is there any meaning, if anything, that you would want people to get from your story?
That's a great question. As far as what I want people to take away from Singularity,
Mhm.
uh, you know, it's really that we are all interconnected, and that nothing we do exists in a vacuum, and that often the only thing keeping us from seeing how much we have in common with each other is a lack of perspective. You know, I also hope that one day the world of Singularity will serve as an inspiration for young creators, the way that the comics did for me growing up. Um, Singularity issue #1 is titled Arrival, and it will begin a chain of events that irrevocably changes the lives of Levi Strode, Gabriel Caballero, and Dana Wu forever. From there, we will see them struggle to come to terms with their powers and abilities as a new world unfolds in front of them, and they will have to find their place in this world as they reckon with the responsibilities of being a hero and confront the question, what does it mean to be human?
So just so you guys know, we're going to run a Kickstarter for this as well. We wanted to get you guys a little taste of it
Oh, yeah.
here. So definitely come out and support. Same way you guys support Extropy and Entropy, come support this, because this is a very important IP for Majestic Comics. We are super happy to have it here. Super happy. I've known Christopher for years, him and his brother for years, right? I'm just glad that forged those connections. Look where they end up, right? They end up right
I
here.
mean, the feeling's mutual, and part of me too has to acknowledge, like, there's a layer of surrealness, because, you know, like, we've been friends for a while, but I've also
Yep.
been a fan of y'all's in the music space
Right,
for years now.
right.
So, and also seeing y'all, you know, unfold with your journey with E&E, it's kind of been, you know, like an opportunity of working with, you know, people that you're celebrities. So, you know, it's like in
Yeah.
the circle.
Minor stuff.
Being in there, hey, you know,
This is what I'm looking forward to, man. I'm looking forward to that collage picture of
yeah.
all of the characters, all the
Hmm.
characters in Majestic Comics, like you
Majestic
see
world.
Marvel has and DC. That's what
Oh,
I
the
want.
Pantheon.
Yes, that's what I want to see. But thanks, man.
Yeah,
We're going
man.
to do this again, and for all of you guys, appreciate you guys watching. And we're going to talk to you guys later.
Thanks for having me.